Imagine standing still while 3,000 armored warhorses thunder directly at your face. Most men would run, but on July 11, 1302, these men didn't run.
Facing a cavalry charge was one of the most terrifying moments in infantry combat. Soldiers armed with short spears or pikes were expected to stand still as thousands of pounds of horse and armored rider thundered toward them. Many broke and ran. Some held firm and stopped the charge. In this episode, we uncover how infantry prepared to kill war horses, why these tactics worked, and what happened when lines failed to stand their ground. Dawn, July 11th, 1302. The Battle of Courtrai, the Battle of the Golden Spurs. On a broad Flemish field near the River Lys, a mass of French chivalry assembles under glittering banners. 3,000 French knights armored head to toe, atop massive war horses that snort clouds in the cool morning. They represent the finest of feudal nobility, confident that by day's end they'll trample the lowly Flemish rebels underfoot. Across the field, forming a curved defensive line, stand some 9,000 Flemish militiamen, not professional soldiers but guildsmen. Weavers, blacksmiths, butchers, they wear bits of armor and leather jerkins. Crucially, they are armed with spears and Goedendags, a kind of stout club with a spike, and have prepared for this very moment. These commoners have no cavalry of their own. They intend to win by holding firm in a solid infantry block. The morning sun glares off a sea of spear points. A horn sounds from the French lines. Time to charge. The knights lower their visors and lances. With an earth-shaking cry of "Montjoie Saint-Denis!" out the first wave of French cavalry surges forward, steel hooves pounding the soil. It is a fearsome sight. A living tide of armored men and horses, a thunderstorm on the ground. Many Flemish militiamen swallow hard behind their simple helmets. Some whisper prayers, but their leaders shout, "Stand fast! Shields up, spears ready!" The front ranks of Flemings plant the butts of their 10-foot pikes into the earth at an angle, bracing with their feet. Immediately behind, men armed with Goedendags heft those deadly spiked clubs above their heads, poised to swing down at any horse that breaches the wall of pikes. They have essentially built a human porcupine. The French knights, confident in their momentum and noble fury, do not slow. Impact. The leading knights crash into the hedge of spears with a terrific clamor. Horses scream as sharp pike heads impale their chests and necks. Some veteran war horses, urged by equally veteran knights, plunge through despite horrific wounds, but the majority shy away at the last moment, rearing or veering as the wall of spears terrifies their animal instincts. In that instant, disciplined Flemish militiamen in the front line step forward between the planted pikes and bring their Goedendags, crashing down on the legs of the horses that did press in. With sickening thuds, spiked clubs break horse knees and stab into equine flanks. The cavalry charge falters. Knights are unhorsed. Some pitch to the ground as their mounts collapse under them. Others sliding off as their panicked horses whirl away from the spear line. Suddenly, instead of a clean breakthrough, the proud French knights find themselves in disarray. A few who manage to penetrate the formation are immediately surrounded by swarming Flemish footmen who stab them from all sides with Goedendags like spearing fish. One French knight, Sir Robert of Artois, the king's own cousin and commander, watches in shock as his esteemed comrades are dragged off their mounts and mobbed by townsmen wielding farm implement weapons. Whenever a knight falls to the ground, a half-dozen militiamen leap upon him, thrusting spears and daggers through the joints of his armor. It is a nightmare inversion of the noble ideal. The mounted warrior, supposed master of the battlefield, flailing helplessly on the ground as commoners butcher him without mercy. For centuries, heavy cavalry, mounted knights, had dominated warfare in Europe. The shock of a knightly charge could smash most infantry lines. But here at Courtrai, and in similar battles, disciplined spearmen turned the tables. They became known, if unofficially, as the horse killers, infantry who specialized in bringing down cavalry by targeting the vulnerable horses. The Flemings at Courtrai exemplified this. Their front ranks were densely packed pikemen, alternated with men wielding Goedendags in between. The pikes created a deadly fence. Flemish pikers planted their 10-foot spears at an angle and braced them with foot against the charge's impact. Chroniclers noted that the horses of the majority of the attackers shied away at the wall of pikes. Well trained as the knights were, most could not force their mounts onto the spear points. For those few knights who did press in or whose horses pushed through the gaps, the second line of militiamen with Goedendags was waiting. As soon as a horse's chest or legs cleared the pike tips, a heavy spiked club smashed into it. One medieval account specifically describes Flemish militiamen charging out after the knights and clubbing their horses to force them to dump their riders. The effect was devastating. An armored knight on horseback was a fearsome engine of war, but on foot, toppled amid enemy infantry, he could be overwhelmed. The Flemish essentially nullified the knight's advantage, his mount's speed and mass, and then used numbers to finish him once unhorsed. It's important to grasp how shocking this was to the medieval mindset. At Courtrai, the French nobility expected a quick rout. They even boasted beforehand how many Flemish commoners each would slay. The result flipped their expectations entirely. The battle earned the name Golden Spurs because some 500 pairs of gilded, knightly spurs were collected from the French dead. This symbolized an epical moment, a largely infantry force of Guildsmen defeating the flower of feudal cavalry. The weaponry and tactics of the horse killers played a central role in that victory. The Flemish had learned from earlier clashes, like recent French defeats in marshy terrain, that tightly packed spears could hold off cavalry if morale held. They also took advantage of terrain. The field had ditches and was soft, underfoot from recent flooding, hampering the knights' charge, similar to how the Scots at Bannockburn 1314, or the Swiss later on would choose, ground unfavorable to horses. But ultimately it came down to courage and cohesion. Those spearmen had to stand in the face of thundering hooves, trusting their comrades' pikes on either side would protect them. At Courtrai stand they did. Back on the field, the French knights regroup for another attempt. The first charge's failure has stunned them, but their blood is up and shame drives them to renew the attack. Two more waves of cavalry form and charge different parts of the Flemish line. The Flemish, seeing the initial success, roar defiance. A deep chant rises, Vlaanderen de Leeuw, Flanders the lion, referencing their rampant lion flags. The French left-wing knights come crashing in next. Some try flanking maneuvers, but the Flemish line has anchored itself by streams and ditches, funneling the knights into prepared killing zones. Again, the brutal formula repeats. Spear tips thicken the front. Horses balk or impale themselves. Then Goedendag-wielding infantry rush forward, swinging at horses' heads and legs. An observer describes how, whenever a French knight or squire was knocked to the ground, he was speared like a fish. The imagery is vivid. The knights became like helpless prey. In one dramatic moment, a high-ranking French lord, let's imagine, Count Jacques de Saint-Pol, actually manages with a handful of knights to breach a segment of the line. He and his men burst through, cutting down a few militiamen. For an instant it looks like the chivalry might turn the tide. But the Flemish commander, Jan van Rennes, immediately commits his reserve. A trumpet sounds and fresh guild militias from Bruges and Ypres charge into the gap. Reinforcing it, now St. Pol's group is surrounded. The Count's horse is speared in the chest and collapses. St. Pol staggers up, only to receive a spike through his visor. He falls among the press of bodies. With that, the small breach is sealed. The wall of spears holds once more. By now, hundreds of French knights lie dead or dying. The psychological shift is palpable. The remaining French knights, seeing their comrades fall en masse, begin to lose their legendary nerve. The once invincible cavalry start to fall back across the whole front. One by one at first, then in groups. They turn their horses and attempt to flee towards the streams behind them. But the terrain that hindered them on the advance now traps them in retreat. Horses splash and flounder in the marshy banks of the Groninger Brook, where panicked knights are overtaken by vengeful Flemings who have begun pursuing. The slaughter is terrible. Mounted men were overtaken and killed by Flemish soldiers bent on revenge. As they struggled to escape through the stream, the battle is effectively over. The proud mounted nobility of France is decimated, their golden spurs literally taken as trophies. And it was done primarily by the steady hedge of common spears and the savage. Blows aimed at the knights' equally noble steeds. As the sun sets, the Flemish infantry stand exhausted, but victorious on a field strewn with armored corpses and dying horses. The air is thick with the smell of blood and sweat, and the ground glitters with those prized golden spurs being collected from fallen French knights. This unprecedented triumph of town militia over feudal cavalry sends shockwaves across medieval Europe. One Flemish militiaman, leaning on his Goedendag, looks over at his comrades, many bloodied, some wounded, but alive, and can scarcely believe it. They faced the feared knights head-on and won. The Battle of Courtrai became legendary as a showcase of how disciplined infantry with simple weapons could topple the might of heavy cavalry. Chroniclers note that about 1,000 French knights and nobles were killed, a staggering loss for the aristocracy. The Flemish lost only a few hundred men. The world took notice. After 1302, infantry armed with pikes or polearms became increasingly central in warfare, foreshadowing the Swiss pikemen and English longbowmen who would humble knights repeatedly in the 14th century. At Courtrai, the horse killers, those guildsmen who aimed for the horses, delivered the decisive blow. A medieval illustration described by historian William Welsh shows just that. Flemish foot soldiers block the charge of a French knight by attacking both horse and rider. A pike is thrust at the knight's head, while a sword is driven into the horse's chest. This tactical combination, hit the knight and the horse, proved lethal. For the people of Flanders, the victory was more than tactical. It was symbolic. It vindicated the idea that common citizens, if well led and united, could defy the social order of knighthood. The Lion of Flanders roared that day, and Europe would never forget the lesson. In emotional terms, one can picture the Flemish celebrating on that field, hoisting captured banners and perhaps erecting some makeshift memorial to their fallen. They had stood like a living wall, weathering the thunder of hooves and coming out triumphant. The psychological drama is striking. At dawn, fear and tension as ill-armed militiamen face a terrifying cavalry charge. By dusk, elation and pride as they realize they were the deadlier force. Thus, the spearmen against cavalry scene encapsulates a primal clash. Flesh and blood infantry with pointed sticks versus armored man on armored beast. It appeals because it's a story of underdogs and innovation, of gritty teamwork overcoming flash and arrogance. And indeed, after Courtrai, the era of unquestioned cavalry dominance waned. Battles like Bannockburn, 1314, and Laupen, 1339, saw similar outcomes with spear formations. The shock and awe of knights was answered by the steadiness and spikes of the horse killers. As a French chronicler ruefully wrote of Courtrai, it was the grief of all France, the flower of our knighthood cut down by base tradesmen. But in that grief lay recognition. War had changed. The horse killers, the spearmen, had earned their place in martial history through courage and cunning, showing that even the mightiest charger could be toppled when met by a forest of unwavering spears.